All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We are starting a new series today, how to price your home. So, if you're looking to sell your home, what are the things to think about, the do's, the don'ts, the thoughts on timing? We're going to cover a lot of ground today with our co-host as well as a guest. So, we are going to bring both Chase Hodgson and Charlie Wetherington onto the show. How you doing today, gentlemen?
Doing well.
Doing well.
Good, good. Hey, just so everybody knows, you've probably seen Chase quite a bit. He's obviously on the lending side, but what better part of 10 years on the appraisal side, Chase?
Yep, that is correct. Right here in the valley, through the big boom prior to 2008, and through the great debacle that came after.
Gotcha. So a lot of help in helping us identifying how to price these homes. I know I lean on you, quite often when things get a little, sophisticated or complicated. So I really appreciate your efforts on that. And then
Yeah.
Charlie's on the My Home Connection team as a licensed real estate agent, and we're going to ask him to kind of play double duty here, both being an agent and kind of a seller as well. So asking some of the questions that we get from home sellers as we walk through this process. So with that, let me do a couple of housekeeping items real quick here, gentlemen. For those of you that I haven't met, my name is Jerod Lee. I'm the associate broker and team lead here at My Home Connection, also known as MHC Realty. Our sponsor for today is the perfect home selling process. We've been developing this over the better part of the last couple of decades, bringing just a lot of tools, skills, information, knowledge to bear to help make the home selling process as efficient, as cost effective as possible. We're going to offer up to $500 on the appraisal for your next purchase on the lending side. Chase is going to help with that at close. And then we're going to help up to $500 at close doing a pre-listing inspection, so to help minimize some of those costs. But anyway, if you have any questions or want to talk about the items here we have, these are just some of the items, tools that we have captured within the perfect home selling process. So with that, let's bring everybody back on. And I originally started this with don'ts, and then I arranged the slides to do's. Not quite sure why, because now that I think about it, it almost seems like the don'ts are more, in some cases, more important than the do's. Anyway, that's where I landed.
Always good to start out positive, though, Jared. Always good to start out positive.
Well, that's why I shifted it. Now that you say that, I'm like, yeah, I don't want to kind of get off on the wrong foot, and so that's why I did it. But I do want everybody to understand that there is a lot to get your head around on the don't sides that are equally, if not more important. So but let's talk about the do's. The first one that I want to talk about is whenever I'm talking with a seller, I communicate that we're not only talking about it for the buyers that are in the market, right? These are the people that are on the Zillows, the Realtor.coms, the MyHomeConnection.coms, but we're also talking about what it looks like, what the appraiser is going to look at it, right? You're likely going to have a financed transaction, and at some point, we're going to have a value associated to it by the appraiser. So to overlook that, not pay attention to that, can quite often or create a false start now, because you've got your head wrapped around what you perceive the value to be, and the appraiser says it isn't quite there. You've seen that quite a bit,
Yeah.
Chase.
Yeah.
Where'd that come from?
Yeah. I've seen it and to preface this, as agents, you guys have different jobs than appraisers, right? Like, um, you, you're trying to maximize the return that your clients get on their home, right? So we're not like, I by all means don't want to say you need to do exactly what an appraiser does, because you have a different job than an appraiser does, right? And so basically, it's more of doing the homework up front and making sure that you have documentation as to why that you believe it's priced that way. And then that's how you would approach, with an appraiser, right? So the appraiser, um, looking at comparables and things like that, similar to what you do, but then like you always want to try and get the top dollar that you can for your client, and you don't want to take away or change that approach necessarily.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. And now that I'm thinking about it a little deeper, the do's and the don'ts are kind of inextricably connected. Um, because when we talk about the don'ts, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Don't just take the online values, the Zillows, the realtors, because it's just a mathematical algorithm that sits in the background pulling from data that it either has or doesn't have. And if it doesn't have it, it's just, extracting, extrapolating, filling in gaps that it may not be doing a good job with, right, Chase? We've had this conversation quite a
Yep.
bit that I don't know where it's getting that number from, because clearly there's some valuable data missing.
Right. Yeah, it happens all the time. It goes back to information is king, right? And in a real estate transaction, the agents themselves, like they are the ambassadors of the information if they're willing to go out and get it and find it, right? So an appraiser is going to look at MLS just like you guys. He can call the other agents on the comparables, on the everything, just like you guys. So if you're gathering your information up front and determining what that value should be and why, right? Like, there may be a comparable that sold low that can affect you, but if you do the research and find out why it sold low, then you can help the appraiser disqualify that comparable, right?
Yeah.
So it really comes down to the information and doing your research up front.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a lot of information that we can glean as real estate agents that the other sites can't. Right? They're using the data that they have, and then by the way, we can read between the lines to make adjustments. Right? You and I've had numerous conversations around site, property adjustments, and I don't know how an algorithm would know those values, right? Because that's kind of back end, appraiser information or real estate agent experience knowledge.
Yeah.
I can't
Well,
imagine how they plug that into the.
yeah, and it's harder in some states than others too, right? Like the online information is more restricted um, in Idaho because we're a non-disclosure state,
Mm-hmm.
right? You won't always have all the information, available to you online, and so it can take a little more footwork, and it's good to understand how an appraiser approaches value and how they determine their adjustments and how they come to things, so that you understand not again, not so that you as an agent can change, but so you know how to support your determination of value.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, know the value of the home currently, right? We'll do, almost all of us do a free comparative market analysis, a CMA for you to show you the apples to apples comparisons of like properties. And by the way, there's a lot of details that you would want to know. Your neighbor 5 doors down that you think might be a comp could easily be excluded as a comp, right, Chase? We've seen that before, whereby like,
Yep.
why did they sell for this? And there's a reason why it doesn't even show up in our comps, because an appraiser is not going to, perceive it or evaluate it as a comparable enough property to include it, because it just needs to be excluded.
Yep.
So current market value, what the appraiser's looking at the value of the property, because if you don't factor those two in and build a net sheet and a plan around the proceeds of the sale of the home, and all of a sudden, what you marketed it for and what you got under contract for is different than the appraisal value, that could throw your whole plan sideways, right? 10, 20, 30 grand can make a big difference in whether or not it makes sense to sell your home.
Yeah. Yeah, it really can. It really can. It's not always that close, but yeah, it's in some cases it's whether you're paying to sell your home or not, right?
Yeah.
And you definitely don't necessarily want to get into that situation if you don't have to.
Yep. Yep. What's your thoughts, Charlie, as we're talking about this? Any seller questions come to mind specifically about the different perspectives and putting a value
Well,
on the home?
yeah, and appreciate you asking that. From a seller's perspective, I want best value. I'm not sure I know how to get it. And where the appraiser's good at what they do, our job as agents, listing agents, is to be good at doing CMAs and understanding that market. Everything that you guys already talked about. So from a seller perspective, they're going to want to know how you know and then why they can trust you in the process. And it's through, again, making sure we're communicating effectively that the CMA is a snapshot in time. If I'm doing one for you today, but we're really not looking at listing for the next 3 or 4 months, but we're doing some homework, we're probably going to do another CMA just prior to getting it in the market, just because it's always a snapshot in time, and the market is people's attitude.
Yep.
And what they're willing to do, and their trust of the market, and those things. So it changes. That's the blessing. But from a seller's perspective, I'm really going to want to know, how do I know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have that confidence.
And you touched on, slide 3 here for optimal trending value. The snapshot of today, depending on how the aggressive is in its upturn or downturn, right? We're going to want to know the trending value, so we can calculate, hey, if we look to sell your home, I'm going to put a value on it. I have an idea of what the trend lines are doing, and if it stays at this rate, I can forecast or foreshadow a little bit where your pricing might be. But you better be really good at, understanding if that trend line is going to stay consistent or potentially adjust one way or another, or you could really miss the mark.
Yeah, and for sellers, I mean, I've heard sellers say, well, I want this much for my house because my neighbors sold for this much. They sold 6 months ago, and you're not exactly the same footprint in yet. So helping them understand the realities that, hey, we are going to get you the best value for your home, and that because we do work with appraisers. I've had calls on listings where it's sold, and the appraisers call within that next week saying, hey, I just have a few questions. I've got another home I'm doing an appraisal on. Can we talk? And that's not sharing secrets. That's just simply helping the sellers and the buyers in the market with clear understanding, like you said earlier. Why did one house sell for a little less? What was the reality of it? And gathering that information is critical, and builds, I mean, as a seller, I'm going to want that confidence.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The second item I have here is to know your buyer. And what I mean by that is, I have a fairly recent example of a home that I took some buyers to see, and the listing agent had it priced what I would feel was an appropriate number to put it on the market at. But the problem is that the home was extremely dated. We call them time capsules, right? I walk in and I feel like I flash back to the 70s because the carpeting and the light fixtures and the appliances, I mean, it was literally a 70s home. But if you price it at the fair market value, not having any updates, and your normal buyer is the person that's going to come in and have to put, I don't know, $40, $50, $60, $100,000 into the home, quite often their inclination is going to be, well, I don't want to buy it for that price because I got to put all this, money into it. So is that home a home that should be sold to the average buyer today, or an investor buyer? Because the investor buyer is going to have some capital to put in to do all the upgrades that you need. And by the way, their pricing structure, what they have to buy it at, is significantly different than what the average consumer is going to buy it at. Does that make sense? So the buyer pool is different, and the pricing might need to be adjusted accordingly. And by the way, do you make investments for the average consumer in hopes that you get that value, or do you not put money in and then price it so that an investor can look at it and see if it works with their numbers? Anyway, just knowing who's gonna be buying the home, I think, is gonna help maybe adjust that go live listing price. What's your thoughts on that, Chase?
Oh, absolutely. You have to know that, like, whether, when you're reselling, are you reselling to a first-time home buyer, to a move-up buyer, to, like you said, investors? All of those have different capabilities and what they can do as far as, purchasing power. And so you definitely have to know your market so that you market that house correctly. You also wanting, as I'm sure both of you can attest to, wanting to get it in front of the right people. And all of that goes into not just, determining value, but knowing, who to market to. So I think absolutely that's a big key in, you know, being able to not just maximize the value for what you have, but understanding what you have.
Yeah, your listing agent should be able to say, okay, fine, if this is an investor property, because I don't have capital put into it or I don't want to put any more into it, well, let's make a hard push towards marketing towards investors. And
Mm-hmm.
they're going to want to see numbers, right? What's my purchase price? What's my investment? What's my ARV, my after repair value? And market it to those folks and get them driving through the property instead of the kind of false start of I don't know who my buyers are, so I kind of market to them, but it doesn't really make sense to that group. And then I kind of shift and I start to market it to a different group, but the information's missing, and then all of a sudden your days on market are dragging out, and it's not really marketed to anybody really well. Have you seen evidence of that sometimes, Charlie?
Yeah. So I'm sitting here thinking this conversation. If I was the seller and I was inviting a listing agent to come and talk about selling my home, when would we be having that conversation about who we're going to market it to? That'd probably be something we do up front,
Yeah,
right up as we get to know their home and know their needs. We're probably going to have that conversation sooner than later, so that they don't go into it thinking like, "Hey, my folks have gone into
assisted
assisted
living.
living and we're going to sell the home, but oh my gosh, it's really a fix or repair type home, right?" So they're thinking, "Well, we're going to sell it just residential, or maybe is it going to go investor?" And having those conversations, I would think as a seller, I'd want to know that stuff probably sooner than later,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
and then be able to work toward getting those into those markets once it's online, into those right markets where you're driving buyers, the right buyers to it, and avoiding all the foot traffic that's not going to do anything.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The one thing we haven't talked about just yet is iBuyers, right? That's a whole nother buyer pool. Is that who you're selling it to? And I have a convenience tax here, so we might as well talk about that a little bit. But the hey, I'll buy your home, in any condition. Those buyers. Hey, I've got the open doors where they're just making you an offer based upon their internal calculations. Um, if that's your buyer, then you can circumvent or eliminate a need for a lot of the things you might otherwise do, because that buyer is looking at the home differently than the average consumer. But to understand, they're going to pay a different price for that property, right? They're buying homes in bulk. Um, so that can shift, that it should be a conversation right up front is, hey, I've got pets or kids or, disabled family in the house, family member in the house or whatever. So to know that that might potentially be your most logical buyer where, hey, I've got health issues and I can't have the average consumer cycling through my house, every couple hours. Maybe that an iBuyer is your buyer. But then, by the way, what does that convenience tax look like? And that convenience is they let you pick the close date. They don't make you make repairs necessarily, but they'll give an adjustment for the perceived repairs that they're going to need to make. So anyway, yet another newer buyer that's relatively new, in our industry. Any additions on that one, Chase, that you can think of, different types of buyers that you would want to know up front?
Man, I mean, it's kind of endless, right? But I think those are the biggest ones that you've touched on. Just knowing your market, your price point, what buyers that's going to bring, or any inconvenience, your speed, right? Like if you've got, I think that's what I've seen the most of lately is just folks that have had to leave for a job.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, we had one of these, right, where it was difficult for them to get rid of the house here. Whether or not they qualify for the new purchase will determine how quickly they need to sell,
Yeah.
and what concessions they need to make in order to move it quickly, or just whether or not, even if they qualify with that other payment, how long can they make two payments,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, definitely. What is your personal situation? I was trying to think if I had this on one of those slides, but that is an absolutely critical one. Is what is your personal situation? Somebody that has 3 6 months can price it, has the luxury of pricing it and letting it sit on the market till that just right buyer comes along. But
Right.
if you've got to sell it immediately to like an iBuyer or just to the average consumer, it's all about price, right? The lower you go down in price, the more eyes you have on the property, the more traffic you get through, the more likelihood you get an offer. So we might price it more aggressively because you need to get out of it more aggressively.
Yeah, and that also again, right, to circle back to where we started from, that kind of situation is something that needs to be, that's the research we need to do when you're doing the listing, because if somebody had to leave quickly and lowered their price because of that, that may be some information you'll want to share with the appraiser when it comes time to appraise your comparable that's right next door.
Yeah. Yeah, that brings up a really good point. I'm trying to think if I have these in slides too, but those are going to be details that we as agents will know. Was there a seller concession? Like, hey, that sold down the street for X dollars, but then when we go look at the listing, there was a 20K seller concession to the buyer, helping with closing costs and on and on and on. It's like, no, it didn't sell for that. I mean, it did,
Right.
but net was 20 grand less. So that matters.
Yeah, absolutely it does.
So let's see, just keep things moving along here, but have a buyer's lens. And I know as a seller, it's going to be really hard to take a look at your home in a objective way, to look at it as the buyers are going to look at it. We've all kind of seen the meme that, this is what your house looks like as a home seller. This is what your house looks like to a buyer. This is what your home looks like to an appraiser. And this is what your home looks like to an inspector, right? And it's all manner of different homes. You can barely tell that it's the same property. But I think it's a healthy exercise to say, if I was a brand new buyer and my lender told me this is my budget and I was looking in this area, these are the homes I'm going to look at, and go through that exercise. Am I
Yeah.
competitive? Am I drawn to go look at that property? Because if I look at it online and I just kind of dismiss it because it's overpriced, by the way, that'll be in the don'ts, don't overprice. But that's a lost opportunity to get a potential buyer into your property, that you don't want to lose out on because you didn't present it in a way that's attractive enough to get their foot in the door.
Jerod, I think that's one of those very must-have conversations with the seller. Not that maybe they haven't given it some consideration, but how helpful it is for them to step into the buyer's shoes and say, if I was buying a home, what would be my considerations? What would be my checklist of things, so that they understand that when people come, first off, don't be offended when you get offers you don't like. Understand that, who your buyers are. I mean, that's so very helpful. Keeping, as a seller, keeping your peace, just having that perspective, recognize, and it really, I think it really helps with being honest about setting what the CMA has said is a good price, what the appraisal prices are look like they're going to be. And all of that just brings a sense of calm
Mm-hmm.
through the process, because I don't know of any other process that's as emotionally taxing as buying or selling a home.
Right. Right. And to remove the anxiety and just have a frank conversation about the data. Right? Let's focus on the information. Who's the competition? Is the competition the one that's on the market? And also, is it the competition of what the appraiser's looking at, right? I meant to lean into this, and that's, agents are looking at what's on the market, what's going on today, a snapshot in time. An appraiser's looking at what's historical data, right? What's sold, what's in the books that matters, right? This is factual data that's done. It's baked in. And then, by the way, to some degree, maybe pending information, right? Because you're seeing that it's going to close anytime soon. If I misspeak on any of this, Chase, on the appraisal side, but let me know. But that's your lens, right? It's like, what can I factually prove?
It is. So, and this is something I fought with as an appraiser, because I believe that if somebody's willing to pay a price for it, right, I'm supposed to be determining market value. That's part of the market, right? But that current buyer, we don't get a look at. And the other difficult part is listings, actives and pendings. We want to look at to kind of determine where the market's going, and an appraiser can use that to support value, but you can't give it any weight per se, because it hasn't closed, and because there are seller concessions and all these things that go into it that haven't been disclosed or determined yet.
Right.
So it does become difficult, not necessarily because the appraiser wants to come in short or wants to be different, but the parameters by which they have to do their work is set in a manner that makes it difficult, right? So, there's a lot of factors that go into it.
Yeah, and you're held to account, right? I mean, when you do an appraisal, I don't know, is it an audit that you have, or I mean, somebody's could potentially review your files to see that the values are there, right? Post 0809, mortgage meltdown, there's a lot of scrutiny, and did you accurately value the property?
Yeah, there's appraisal management companies in between the lender and the appraiser now, and so that they don't communicate, and then it goes through, a little review. Then if the lender is unhappy, they can order a desk review. They can request a desk review, and so there's liability as far as being an appraiser, and so it's important that they do their job properly. It doesn't mean it always gets done properly.
Yeah.
It's just like any other job in the world. Some are better than others at it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there definitely is oversight there.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is an appropriate time to jump ahead to the don'ts, and that is, quite often sellers will want a strategy of overpricing it, right? And it's not like a car where you say, hey, I'm going to post it higher than what I really think it's going to go for, and I'm going to negotiate. A car usually doesn't have an appraiser coming in right behind you to say that was worth it or not. Clearly you've got to get a loan on it, but it happens differently. So I guess what I'm saying is, as an agent, my approach has always been, there's enough information out there for buyers, and they can sense it. Price it right the first time, because if you overprice it, the market's going to see it, and they're going to potentially overlook your property. And by the way, once they've overlooked it, it's really hard to get them back, right? Like, oh, I've seen that property and I dismissed it for some reason. So don't get dismissed. Ultimately, I personally obviously let the sellers make that final conclusion. But if asked, my recommendation is to never start high and then negotiate down, because every $5,000-$10,000 increment you go above fair market value, you lose a large segment of your buyer pool, because they're not looking there, or they know that you're overpriced and move on. So
I think it's interesting, because I think most of the public doesn't know how that works, right? And I personally, I believe this is where the professional realtor comes into play, right? How you have to deal with the emotion, because it's emotional. People are emotionally attached to their homes, right? They have experience, they've lived there. So you're dealing with that emotion and trying to explain the process to them. But in searching in MLS, when you come with a buyer, you know what they're approved for, and there are parameters that you enter. So if you overprice just because, let's see if we can get it, because I'm sure you guys hear that all the time, mm-hmm. right? Because we can always come down, or whatever the excuse may be. A large group of people won't even see your house, because right. They've set their parameters. This is what they can afford. So even though your home is possibly in their range, if it's the parameters that you set in your search in MLS will exclude that property.
Yeah. Don't miss on buyers. It's a finite pool, and you got to make it as big as you can, and then you got to take that pool and bring them into your house, right? You have to get them through the door. They're not likely going to buy a property without stepping foot in it. So if you discourage them from stepping foot in it, you might lose them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm one that believes that the sweet spot for listing a home and getting it off market and getting it in a pending action is in 2 weeks. And then there's a drift, and we see those statistics really show us that. So I'm helping a seller, or I really want to inform them so that they can make a good choice. It's much like what we were just talking about, having the buyer's lens. If they can see that the buyer is going to come, and what Chase was talking about, they may never see it because it may never fall into their price range. So putting it where it belongs so it gets good traction is so critical in
Yeah.
that process. And again, we never choose that price. We let the seller do that. But if I was a seller, I would be asking those questions. How do I best market it to get the best value
Yeah.
in the least amount of time? Because again, gosh, things that linger, and I know there's lots of homes on the market for 60 days, but boy, it gets really difficult and it gets really quiet after the first couple of weeks because
Yeah.
there's so much other coming on the market.
Yeah. So that's a good example of I have the buyer that missed your home because they didn't look that high, like Chase said. You are on the market for a while. You decide to correct. The buyer that you could have had look a while back, all of a sudden you show up on their radar, but they look on the days on market and they're like, why isn't this home gone? It's a different perspective on that home. It's a
Yeah.
thing, right? We are highly sensitive to the days on market and easily uh, project a stigma on the home based upon days on market. It used to be weeks and months. 3, 6 months wasn't a big deal. Now, if you're on for, double digit days, there's that question mark in your mind. Chase is, yeah, he's laughing.
Yeah, it's this conversation, right? Like, and this is what home buyers and sellers don't understand, right? Especially when they're getting ready to list their house, and and the emotion is involved. But there's so many little aspects to it. Like now, yeah, because yeah, you could miss those buyer pool by overlisting in the beginning, and then you can drop into that buyer pool. But now you have a stigma because your house has been on for 180 days, or you've taken it off and put it back on, and they can see that history, right? So there's just so many ways to limit the people that come look at your house. Whereas if you've got a good professional realtor, just listen to them and and let them help you maximize your return
Yeah, yeah,
in the
yeah.
in the least amount of time.
Right, right. So we've assumed that you priced it right, and now we've got under contract. But at this point, let's assume that you didn't, and now we got to make some price adjustments. I think the sooner you have that conversation, that thought process, the better, right? Because if you're making plans, for the next chapter of your life, not taking into account what the potential would be if you sold it at a much different price point, like that could change your whole decision, right? So, planning on what that, if needed, price reduction is going to be up front could save you a lot of headache. Let's
Yeah,
talk about that
absolutely.
de-escalation. Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And for me, working with sellers, if I'm the seller, I really want you having a serious conversation with me about, before we even go live, what would it look like in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and how would we feel like if the market doesn't treat us right up front, then what do we do so that we stay actively in front of people? And I mean, to me, that's what we offer, is that experience, that understanding. And every seller's going to eventually be a buyer. And quite often sellers just turn right around and become buyers and are in that same market. So it's easy. I think it's an easy conversation to be had, but it's one of just, again, it, there's so many things in life that we do that if we just took a moment to plan what the next 6 weeks would look like, and every week sit down and go, okay, what's the next 6 weeks look like? We'd be we would be more comfortable and confident with what the transaction eventually looks like.
Yeah, Yeah, and we can, generate multiple net sheets based upon, hey, if we sold it at this initial asking price and this is how it all played out versus, hey, for whatever reason, we're on the market for a month, 2 months, what have you. Now at different price points, what does that net sheet look like?
Yeah, and there's things like the unpredictables like seller concessions and the things that come in offers that we can't predict, but we can talk about the different avenues. Like if we get a good offer, but it's 10 lower, but there's no concessions, are you good with that? Or if there's concessions, but it's having that conversation so they're not confused at the moment it happens.
Yeah.
So you're really kind of plowing ground for them, so that stuff's growing already when you get there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about the don'ts, which I think is going to be interesting because we've already kind of gone there by virtue of the do's, right? But looking at that snapshot online and making life decisions because the Zillows or the Redfins tell you what the value is, and now you're moving strong in another direction. I would definitely have that conversation with a good agent about the what ifs, what the timing is, what the trending is, and not putting a whole lot of stock in what's online. Don't get me wrong, there are some cases where it's so cookie cutter that it just they come up with the right value and you're great, and the trending of where your market is isn't super aggressive, so you'll be fine, but more often than not there's something missed, right?
Yes, 100%. Again, going back to Idaho being a non-disclosure state, there are states where you can look at Redfin and Zillow and they are spot on, but we are different. And the way the communities have been built to where you have, from one street to the next, you could have a completely different subdivision, completely different qualities of construction, everything, right? And sales prices, and some of that the automated systems, because they're getting in appraisal as well now. It's called automated valuation modeling, and basically it can't differentiate at that point, right? It can't differentiate on 2x6 versus 2x4 construction, or the quality of the finishes and things like that. And so a lot gets missed in Idaho if you don't do the research.
Yeah. Yeah. So don't get caught up in that. Last year was a particularly good example. I talked with Chase numerous times, and that was because we had a pause, right? Election year, interest rate kind of volatility, uncertainty in a lot of different areas of our lives. When we had the pause, I had to reach out to Chase and say, as an appraiser, and I want to start adjusting my comps, as an appraiser, what direction would you go in? Would you go with a larger radius or diameter of your coverage area? Would you keep it the same and go back in time further and give it, some adjustments for the values over time? So we had to have a lot of those conversations, and I don't know how you'd build that into an algorithm, because they're not going to know how you as the appraiser is going to, because you could say, in some cases I do this, in other cases I do that.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is situational depending on the property and depending on what you're needing, what that item is that you're trying to match to, right? And so it does vary a lot. And the other problem is that two appraisers might look at it differently. We've seen that before.
Yeah.
And so it can be difficult, and you have to just do your best up front. I will say, as far as timing and things like that, on, looking from my lender lens now, the people try to time the market, right? There are people that try to time the market, and you can get really too deep into that. You need to look at real estate as more of a long-term investment, and plan when you buy how long you're going to stay there, and or have an idea of how long you're going to stay there, because that will help you determine your loan program and your down payment and all of that stuff. And then when it's time to go, right? Like you can't, I'm going to wait a month because I know this is going to happen. Like You're never going to time the exact top, and you're never going to time the exact bottom.
Yeah.
So if the numbers work for you, that's when it's time to go.
Yeah. And by the way, if you're selling and buying, Charlie was blessed to get the benefit of both the selling side and the buying side, but that's a super unique situation that we just don't see happening. So if you're trying to, manipulate or control both or either, you're gonna drive yourself nuts, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, a real estate transaction is typically, unless you're a cash buyer, or it's probably a slow enough transaction that it's difficult to time. It's
Yeah.
just not something as Chase was saying. Homes are such large investments that there's something they're more long term look rather than day trading. Day
Yeah.
trading.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So, have you, Charlie, as we've been talking along, has anything popped into your mind that you recall a seller going, "Oh yeah, I get this question asked quite often," either the do's or the don'ts at this point?
Um, yeah, well, one thing comes to mind is um, sellers should know to ask about feedback from those that come to look at their homes
Mm-hmm.
and hear that feedback and use that feedback to help them understand.
Yeah.
That's one that comes to mind that
Yeah.
quite often
By the way,
as
don't
an
take it
agent.
personal.
No, and again, as an agent, I'm always reaching out to all the buyers agents that are coming, and checking in with them to get how did they like it? What was they feel, whether they're making offers or not. I want to know that and give that to the seller. It helps. Again, to me, it's just information's important. It's powerful. It helps them with more of a reality to their property. Like Chase said, gosh, when you've lived in a home, it's your home, and when you go to sell it, it's the best home in the whole neighborhood from your perspective. And
Right.
yet, getting feedback and understanding what people are liking and not liking even helps me alter the marketing on it.
Yeah.
But short of that, that's a great question. I hope I answered it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I think that leads me up to the thought of, um, you know, everybody wants top dollar for their home. Why wouldn't you, right? But you got to understand, your home has to be the top of the heap to get top dollar, right? So when we come in as agents and say these things need to be done, if you really want that uh, top sales price, it's got to be pristine, right? We got to have all I's dotted and T's crossed. I don't mean to be rude, but we hear fairly often that's the top I want, but yet we walk around the property and there's deferred maintenance, right? There's exposed woods or deferred maintenance on different things here and there, and we want you to get top dollar too. But then it becomes a conversation of how much time and money do you want to put into it to get it to that top dollar? We just have to be honest with you that it's not top dollar ready. Okay, what does that mean? Then we got to price it accordingly. Anyway.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you there, and that's why I'm as a team. That's why we're offering some seller credit to get a pre-sale inspection done to know what those things are, so we can honestly call them out, fix the things that the seller wants to fix, because we're going to get them the best dollar.
Yeah.
And again, it's the best dollar. May not be the top, but it'd be the best.
There you go.
And like you said, if it's going to be top dollar, then we are going to take it to that top shelf level, and seller gets to make that choice.
Yeah. Did you have a thought there, Chase?
Well, yeah, and understanding too, and that's why you work with, folks like yourselves that are professional, they know what they're doing, experienced, and can direct you in the right way, because you can do a whole bunch to your house that doesn't add any value and doesn't help with the appraisal. You can do a whole bunch to your house that does help add value and does count towards the appraisal, but you don't get dollar for dollar exchange for that. And so you can do things, and spend the money, and where you're not getting a dollar for exchange out of the appraisal value, right? then you're reducing your max dollar because you're spending more than you're getting back, right? And so that's why working with a professional who understands that stuff is really, really key.
Yeah, the difference of did it go for top dollar or did it go quicker with better terms because it was more desirable? Those are two different
Right.
things. So you put
Right.
$500 into it and you're like, I didn't get that back. Like, no, but you got more buyers through and it sold quicker. That was worth 500
Right.
bucks.
And there's a big difference between marketing and between, because I get those questions all the time, right? Well, if I do this, will it help me get more money? Well, it could, because it doesn't necessarily mean it will appraise for more, but it might increase your chances or make it quicker because it shows better,
Yeah.
right? Like and that's that. Those are two different items to look at for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and we leverage a staging consultant for all. At least I do for all of my listings. The agents on the team, that's up to them. I always highly recommend that they do. But the idea there is we're going to build you an exhaustive list of everything that we would recommend between me, the agent, me, the stager, of everything we would do to put this in the best light to go live. Now, it's up to you as a homeowner, seller, to say, I'm either going to do all of those or I'm going to do most of those, right? Cost benefit. I don't have the money to put into it. I don't have the time to put into it. Okay, that's fine. But we're going to at least give you the list, our recommendations to do them all. But obviously, there's a convenience factor and other considerations. But at least you should know what all we recommend and why.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
I concur with that. The brings up that whole conversation about the value of staging and how full a house can be. And if you're listing a home, if the seller is going to be living in it, the value of simplifying the home so that people see potential, not your life. And that to me is so critical that for me, I'm as an agent, I'm willing to pay for the staging consultation. I'm willing to pay for the staging because it will move your home quicker. And that I've never seen not help.
Right.
So it's one of those things where, gosh, if I'll let the homeowner decide whether they want some staging, but hey, I can do that for you at my expense because it really is going to make my life and your life a lot easier. And it's going to bring a lot more positive comments. And if those comments are going out through marketing, it's going to bring other buyers.
Yeah.
So to me, it's just money well spent.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. Totally agree. The next one I have, this is an interesting one. I didn't even know how to label it exactly, but I call it don't use Insta values. And I get asked all the time, what do you think my home's worth? And clearly, you don't want to dodge the question, but I also think it's bad practice to just put a realtor in a position to attach a value on it, other than maybe, hey, I can give you a range today, but I'd like to go put more information, more research into it. So if an agent is quick to put a value on it just off the top of their head, again, back to all the reasons why the online algorithms don't work, a human being has to take into consideration the same things. Like even if you knew the market really well, Chase, as an appraiser, would you feel comfortable just giving somebody a number off the top of your head?
No, and actually there's regulations against that for appraisers. If you give someone a value, you can be held to that, and you have to have the documentation in place to support that value that you were given. And so, yeah, in no way, shape, or form is that a thing, because every situation is so different.
Yeah.
That you really need to. And man, you talk about a range like that. That was one of my biggest pet peeves. Like they make an appraiser come down to an exact dollar amount of what that house is worth, when realistically, if it's between 450 and 475, right, their home's in that range, then you should be good. Like an appraiser should be able to give a value range, but that's just my own personal
Right.
pet peeve.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, as a seller, there's probably a preference of just having number, right? Because the unknowns are uncomfortable. But to expect people to just give it to you, I think is unrealistic. That you deserve to have the research done for somebody to go away and take a look at it. One of the the things, to Chase's point, as an appraiser, there's things you can and can't do. Obviously, all licensed agents can do a CMA, comparative market analysis. And then one of the few things you get as an associate broker, along with your change in title, is the ability to do a broker price opinion. In certain life events, we can charge for that. And obviously, we need documentation, to support the values that we have. But what I'm saying is, we can all too often, as a seller, put ourselves in a position where we just want to hear a number, and I would push back on that. I would want to take the time to get a really good number.
Yeah. If you're really curious, if you just want a number, look at Zillow and Redfin, and it's not going to be accurate. That's the same information you're going to get from an agent or an appraiser that doesn't do the research.
Yeah. There's something missing, and if there's something missing and you're making life decisions on something missing, probably not a good idea.
Right.
Anyway, and then the other one, sellers are just going to hate hearing this, but we hear this way more often than you'd think. This is what I need. You can kind of hear my response coming already, right? Like I can't convince a buyer to buy your house because you need this money. That's not how it works. They're going to buy the home based upon what they're willing to give you for it, substantiated by an appraiser that says it's worth that, so that they can get a loan on it. And a lot of times it just works, but sometimes, if you're in a situation that you just need a number, you don't want to hear anything else other than, okay, I'll list it for that number. And by the way, there are brokerages out there that will do that. There are literally brokerages that don't do CMAs. They just ask you for your information, and they put it in MLS at wherever you want to be. And I don't know that I've ever seen that go well.
No.
The word professionalism comes to mind, whether somebody's asking us to give them a value off the top of our head. To me, that's not professional. I would do more harm just in my relationship with them. For some reason, was wrong. And so it's really, the CMA is really, the value there. But again, it's like price for what you need. I have talked to potential sellers that actually said right up front, I would like to list my home, but I'm going to need this much. We went and did a CMA, looked at it and said, we're 30 grand away from your goals. And they said, fine, then we're not going to sell it.
Yeah. That's
the time to have that conversation. Not, yes, I am selling, but I need this much money, because obviously the market will dictate what they really get.
Yeah. I'll give you another example, and it's going to touch back on a couple of earlier parts of the conversation and come back to the price you need. But I had an agent on the team that had a seller reach out to them and say, I need to sell my home for this. And in doing the research, it had been put on the market almost a year ago at a very high number, and it was one of those brokerages that I told you would do it. What I found interesting is that some of the online sites that give you their estimates attached a number value to that property because a listing agent said it's worth that much. So I'm communicating the fact that even the online algorithms will quite often auto adjust by hundreds of thousands of dollars whatever prior value they had, in lieu of what the now new agent had, because they're making an assumption that that local agent knows best. And so you see where I'm going here, right? There was hundreds of thousands of dollars off the value of where it originally started. You see the trend line shoot way up because the seller put a price tag on it that was ridiculous. And then now trying to get another listing agent to market it that's saying, hey, that, where'd that value come from? It's because it was a price I needed. And so now the consumer sees all these gyrations in your values swinging wildly, going, what is going on with this property? Anyway, it created a dynamic that I don't know how she's going to overcome.
Interesting.
because it's super confusing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's very interesting. I didn't realize that they did that, honestly. So that's
yeah,
what a mess.
yeah. I've seen literally as soon as I go live, it'll jump like within $5,000 of where I priced it. It's like, yesterday it was worth X, but now that we put it on the market, it jumped right to where I put it. Anyway,
Interesting.
yep. Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to belabor that one too much, but it's a tough one. It's a tough one because I get it. Sometimes you need it for whatever. I got to move out of state. I gotta retire. I gotta pay for my assisted living. Whatever it is. Anyway, so let's talk about timing, right? So we talked about the trend lines. If we list in January versus, hey, let's do the consultant work. Let's get you a list of things that need to be done, and let's get you into kind of the busy time of the season, and watch where the market's going over the next month or two. Charlie kind of said it earlier that we don't want to lean on that too heavily, but in very strong years, that can be helpful, but I wouldn't rely on it. Just depend on your agent's advice in their experience of prior years and where the market's likely to be trending.
Yeah, the trends are, some of them are pretty deep, right? Like, in some of the winter states, you can see some definite slowdown. But again, that has to do with inventory levels as well, right? Like, you got low inventory, you're depending on new construction, you get into winter and it slows that down, right? Then buying and selling tends to slow down. So there's a lot of factors that go into even the normal trending that we would expect to see. And like you said, you can't rely on it wholeheartedly because there are times when there's other, we're in the middle of it now. You got political pressure and everything else that disrupts what, a normal market could be. So there's just, there are trends that you can plan for, but you don't, like you said, don't depend on them 100%.
Yeah, well, I liked your approach, Chase, that if you're just going in, know that at some point I'm going to sell my house and I've had it long enough where I'm going to have equity. And depending on what my plans are, I've either secured enough equity to make this major life change, whether it's move to another area or buy a move up home or whatever, or I haven't. But to make it such that $5,000-$10,000 makes a big difference isn't a good strategy.
No, and it is a long-term investment. And granted, you can't always do that, right? Life events happen. But if you go into it with that frame of mind, it's just like a 401k. If you take it out at the wrong time, you know what I mean? Like you're going to lose money.
Yeah.
So, approach it as an investment strategy. And we don't, like, even, myself, I've had history of that where it's your primary residence and you have memories there and we always become emotionally attached to it. But ultimately it's a tool to build wealth, and we need to remember that up front.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're just winding down. Any other thoughts come to mind, Charlie, from a seller's perspective about pricing that, we covered an hour, so I think we've covered a lot of ground, but just wanted to see if any other ideas came into your mind.
Yeah. Well, just to speak to the seasonal stuff is obviously, if you're dealing with a professional realtor and with professional lenders, obviously they know their seasonal markets. They know how to guide you on that, and then how to set your pricing for you. And it's like, as a seller, and I have been a seller, so I'm gonna want guidance for what's right. And again, I can go out and try to wing it myself and do an FSBO, which is totally appropriate. There's just so many risks involved in that, and so it's one of working with somebody and getting that information. And I think, I think you said it. What Chase had said was, when you buy your home, already think somewhere down the road I'm going to sell it. Having that mindset as a seller, as a person who's a homeowner, knowing that one day I'm going to be a seller, and I don't have to be caught I can plan toward that.
Yeah.
I think that's the best advice we can give, and keeping that in for educating folks in the market that are into buying and selling is just understanding that as a homeowner, you will one day be a seller. I think
Yeah.
that's just a good place to land.
Yep. Yep. Speaking of landing, I think that's a great way to wrap up today's episode. We covered a lot of ground and, hopefully answered a lot of questions, but certainly feel free to reach out to us if you've got any other questions. We'd be glad to help, and you can take advantage of that no obligation consultation, and we'll just kind of talk you through your particular circumstances, because as Chase said earlier, everybody's situation is unique, and we'd be glad to help. All right, gentlemen. Well, thanks for jumping on the show and all your insight and advice. We really appreciate it.
All right.
Anytime. Had a blast.
All right, everybody. Have a blessed one. Take care.
Bye-bye.